Greetings everybody, welcome to today's webinar, part of the Transforming Data into Digital Asset webinar series presented by PIMSoft. We thank you for joining us and hope you find this webinar informative and valuable. Today we want to demonstrate a Sigmafine approach to support refinery oil loss identification, analysis and control. Today you will learn the best way to identify loss, how Sigmafine can play a key role in a loss reduction program, and the best practices for improving measurements and reducing uncertainty. There are a few housekeeping items to keep in mind during the webinar. The presentation should last approximately 30 minutes, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. If you have a question, submit it using the chat window on the right-hand side of the screen at any time during the presentation. We will answer all of them at the end. The presentation will be made available afterwards for you to download. We'll also send you an email with a link to the presentation, as well as a link to the recording of this webinar. At the conclusion of the presentation, please give us your feedback so we can make this experience and subsequent webinars even more valuable. Thank you for your attention. My name is Gabriele Marazzi, and I'm the account manager for the APAC region in PIMSoft. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our co-presenter for today, Marco Lanteri, our industry principal for refining and petrochemical industries. Hydrocarbon loss accounting is quite an evergreen topic. Losses have a significant impact on the environment due to undesirable emissions, on the safety of the people operating in the plant, as leak can cause not only exposure to noxious materials, but can also be cause of accident, and last but not least, on the profitability of a production process. Regarding last point, it has been estimated that a loss reduction program can bring savings in the range of $2 to $10 million for an average size refinery. Moreover, thefts, one of the most obvious forms of leaks, are heavily affecting the oil and gas industry worldwide. Very famous is the case of Shell's Singapore refinery, where thefts have involved several levels of the company and for many years to reach the amount of $150 million. Ernst & Young estimated that worldwide around $133 billion worth crude and refined product are stolen or adulterated every year. Quite an impressive figure. Now I leave the word to Marco.
We have identified already some important reasons why we should care about refinery losses. But what do we mean by loss? In this presentation, we will always refer to the definition and approach given by the Energy Institute, and more specifically to the HM31 guidelines. If we analyze a facility, on one side we have the inputs consisting of the processed inputs, such as receipts, imports, and the changes in the inventory of the feedstocks. On the other side, we have the outputs, which can be divided in the dispatch products, the fuels, which are used as internal consumptions, and the change in the product inventories. The difference between the two sides are the total losses of the refinery. Later, we will analyze them in more detail. Here, we represented a qualitative indication of the performance of the refinery based on the amount of total losses. Don't take these figures as written on the stone. Still, they can give you a rough idea of where you are. Solomon Index suggests 0.5% being the threshold below which a refinery should stand for a good performance. But losses, of course, fluctuates over time. Here, a statistical analysis based on a data set of 36 monthly data, so 3 years, is provided in this trend together with its corresponding normal distribution. If the expectation is to reduce the losses by an amount which is half the current standard deviation, this would be translated into a benefit of $1.5 million, considering a 100,000 barrels per day refinery and a crude price of $75 per barrel. Again, this is the benefit you might achieve by applying data reconciliation without taking into account changes in instrumentation. How this is possible? Well, the procedure starts from taking into consideration the total measured losses, which can be divided in accountable, therefore the ones that you can directly measure, like flares, or that you can reasonably estimate, such as correlation for evaporation from tanks. Sigmafine reduces the inconsistencies between the inputs and the outputs, and at the same time reduces the uncertainty in the data. Therefore, it can have a double action both on the accountable side and the unaccountable losses. The total loss reduction turns into the economical benefit that you can claim. Let's see a practical application. What you see here on the left and on the right are the loss report. In this case, we use quarterly figures before and after the reconciliation. Now, we won't go in the details of each and every number, but what is interesting to notice is that in this case, the reconciliation was able to improve the agreement between the inputs and the outputs. Inventories have been almost untouched, as well as accountable losses, which were probably quite well measured already in the origin. However, a remarkable reduction in the unaccountable losses was achieved, bringing to a reduction from 1.4% to 1%. Considering again an oil price at $75 per barrel, the benefit is slightly above $1 million. Furthermore, it should be noticed that also the uncertainty associated to the total loss figure has been slightly reduced, as the histogram clearly shows. The applied formula for the calculation of the overall loss uncertainty is again the one provided in the guidelines of the Energy Institute. Just to be translated in words, it's the square root of the sum of the squares of the contribution of each single uncertainty associated to the corresponding loss. The terms according to the accountable and the terms according to the unaccountable loss. Now, if you want to start a loss reduction program, these are the suggested steps to be implemented, considering that this is an iterative process for a continuous improvement. First of all, an analysis of the current status of the plant losses needs to be performed, taking into account an history which should be not less than 1 year. So this will result into the creation of a baseline, a potential target, and a set of actions to be taken, both in terms of balancing and of choice of instrumentation. The Sigmafine model will need to be adapted in order to support the loss accounting step, and the production also of a related report like the ones we have seen before. After running the balance for a few months, the results need to be assessed compared with the initial baseline, and again, actions taken based on the new results. After 1 year, a new baseline can be created, and this can be compared to the original. And from the comparison between the older and the new baseline, the overall benefit can be calculated. We said that Sigmafine models needs to be adapted. In which way? Well, moving from a production accounting to loss accounting requires shifting the focus. In terms of time range, we understood already, typically we need to move from a daily to a monthly procedure. We need to feed the new monthly case based on the daily cases which were previously run for a production accounting. So we need to aggregate original reconciled daily cases values into an overall monthly data. The same aggregation needs to be done with tolerances. So we can start with the reconciled tolerance of the daily cases and average them over the month. Regarding the tank stocks, again, instead of taking the opening and the closing at the start and end of the day, we need to do the same at the start and at the end of the month. The tank tolerance typically is set to 0 for typically for fiscal reasons. Such constraint is not anymore that valid for the loss accounting reason. So it can be decided, it's a user decision, if keeping the tolerance of the tanks at 0 or set such tolerance as a percentage of inventory change. Finally, there are some changes that needs to be performed on the model and add additional streams that might not be necessary for the daily accounting. For example, you want to take care of the evaporation or breathing losses from the tanks. You want to take care of flares. Maybe also you want to represent the unaccounted losses, and this can be done by creating a virtual measurement, which is initially set to 0, as you don't have any clue about, and a tolerance which is large enough and typically set as a percentage of the facility throughput. Now, let's analyze in more detail how some of Sigmafine functionalities can improve the balance and help reducing the losses. One of the biggest sources of gross errors are the misdeclaration of movements. Sigmafine diagnostic help identifying major imbalances around nodes and inventories, thus precisely highlighting where some of the movements could be missing. If you want a more comprehensive approach, there is also a dedicated application, such as the Sigmafine Intelligent Movement Management, which makes the declaration of movement and the real-time monitoring of inventory change versus active movements available to the operators. So it's easier to detect if something is missing, is not declared, or, for example, you see an inventory change, but no movements declared to that specific tank. And so we decrease the level of human errors and consequently also the impact both on the production account, on the daily production accounting and on the loss accounting. Another source of gross error is related to the conversion from volume-based measurement of the crude. One issue is related to the density, which might not be adequate enough. On this side, composition and the quality tracking algorithms can take care of the different blends of crude which are stored in the crude tanks and used as feed to the refinery. So we can improve the estimation of the density, and this is done day by day, and then you can have an aggregated monthly figure. The second error is related to the overestimation of the amount of measured crude due to the water and sediment which is mixed together with the crude before the desalter. Sigmafine, for that purpose, has built-in corrections to take care of the information regarding the amount of water and base sediment and to automatically correct the amount of hydrocarbons. Similar actions can be taken also on compensation of measurements, especially orifice plates, in order to correct the initial raw data with pressure, temperature, why not even compressibility factor of the gas if it is available. For the fuel flow rate calculations, which we need to remember is one of the important terms which are used for the output calculations, if you have an online gas chromatographer, we can, or even a periodic sampling done from the laboratory, Sigmafine can use such information to compensate with the actual molecular weight. Last but not least, a software like Sigmafine supports also internal and external auditing by providing data quality KPIs associated to the balance and by recording all the data changes performed by the users, decreasing the rate of human error, which could be either unintentional, but also intentional. You remember the initial slide that Gabriele showed about the thefts. So Sigmafine tracks each and every change in terms of username, date, time, initial and final figure. Okay, although this presentation is mainly focused on the data reconciliation impact in a loss reduction program, we cannot overlook the effect of measurement devices, which on the long run accounts for a major part of the benefit when the performance baseline especially is poor. So we thought to just summarize briefly the best practices in different critical areas. So starting with the crude, using Coriolis flow meters for crude measurement means having a direct mass measurement instead of a volume-based measurement, with the additional possibility also of getting density information. And this has really a relevant impact in the quality of the measurement of the input feedstock. Another critical area are flares, which typically see quite a variable flow rate and also variable composition. Therefore, orifice plates are often inaccurate. And so variable frequency ultrasonic flow meters provide much more accurate measurements. On the fuel gas, we partially anticipated that when we talked about compensation, having an online gas chromatographer allows not only to take care of a proper composition for the correction of the flow rate, but also verify the billing of the external provider of natural gas, for example. Coke is another typically hard to measure value, and for coke drums, some of the most reliable technologies are either radar-based or multi-point radiometric level measurements. Finally, for the fugitive emissions, studies report that the typical correlation that are used to calculate these losses, which for a major part are concentrating in the tank farms, are typically underestimated, in some cases even 2 or 3-folds. Some of the technologies that are currently used or under experimentation are based on infrared cameras, dial, and radial plumb mapping. All these technologies combined together can provide a much better measurements and estimation of the overall emissions. Okay, back to Gabriele, which will present some use cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. The first use case comes from Petrobras. Petrobras, after using Sigmafine to support their loss reduction program, was able to reduce losses from above 1% to 0.5%. Some of the improvements dealt with the exclusion of the FCC coke production and with the compensation of free water in crude. Here are some of the main benefits they reported, which cover many of the areas we talked before, such as density and volume to mass conversion, but also improvements from an organizational point of view. Second use case was presented by Emerson at the Sigmafine Summit 2020 and regards the YPF refinery in Argentina. A full study has been conducted and several improvements both on the balance and on instrumentation have been applied, including the installation of best-in-class measurement devices. The improved instrumentation resulted into higher accuracy of the data used as input to the balance, where the same measurements were validated by the reconciliation approach. The reconciliation indicators on the right highlight the status of the model and the overall quality of the measurements, supporting the selection process of the measurement devices. The baseline was very poor, showing an initial imbalance of 7.5%. Measurement compensation greatly improved the balance with a 4% reduction. An additional 3% reduction was achieved by installing new meters, bringing the imbalance to 0.5%. So, today we learned that Sigmafine can unlock much more value on top of the mass balance. Company can benefit by the use of Sigmafine for improving the oil loss reduction program, and better loss identification means focused actions to reduce emission and improve safety and profitability.